The kick came at 11:42 on a Tuesday morning, in the middle of the fourth quarter's most expensive silence, and I felt it before I understood it, a small, deliberate knock from the inside, like someone tapping on a door to ask if it was safe to come out yet. My hand went to my belly under the conference table before my mind caught up to my hand. Beside me, close enough that our sleeves touched, the coldest woman in the building went very still. She did not look at me. She did not have to. Her hand found the same spot mine had, low and light, and I watched 22 years of a woman's carefully built reputation crack open in front of 11 board members who had never once seen her flinch. To understand what that kick meant, I have to go back 4 months to a blackout, a stranger's coat, and a version of me who still believed being careful was the same thing as being safe. My name is Wren Ashford. I am 26. I am an omega, which in the circles I used to work in was treated less like a fact about my biology and more like a permanent asterisk beside my competence. And I have spent most of my adult life proving the asterisk wrong to people who had already decided not to read the footnote. I was a forensic auditor at Bristow and Hale for 3 years before a senior partner named Martin Ashcroft buried a fraud he'd committed under my signature and let the firm believe I'd been too emotional, too soft, too omega to notice what I was looking at. I noticed everything. That was the problem. Numbers don't lie, but the men who arrange them do, and I had the kind of memory that keeps every column upright in my head long after the page is gone. It didn't matter. I was let go with a severance check and a reference letter so faint it was practically an apology, and I spent the next year taking contract audits nobody wanted in offices that smelled like burnt coffee and quiet contempt. By the time the blackout hit the Meriden Street station, I was 7 weeks along and didn't know it yet. I only knew that my suppressants had been unreliable for a month, that my coat was too thin for October, and that the trains had stopped between one breath and the next, plunging 400 strangers into a dark that smelled like ozone and fear. People do strange math when they're frightened. They count exits that don't exist and doors that won't open. I counted the ones that would. It's the only gift my father left me, besides a brass compass that doesn't point true anymore, a mind that goes quiet and clear exactly when everyone else's goes loud. I got 11 people off the platform and into the stairwell before the emergency lights caught, rationed 3 flashlights across a crowd of 40, and didn't notice the alpha in the gray wool coat until she was standing directly in front of me, studying me the way you'd study a column that didn't add up. "You counted the exits," she said. "Force of habit." "Whose?" "Mine now." She didn't smile. She didn't do anything so easy as smile. But something in her shoulders loosened half a degree, and that was the first time I caught her scent under the panic and the dark, vetiver, and something colder underneath it, like rain landing on slate. It hit some low animal part of my brain and lit it up gold. I didn't know yet that mine had done the same thing to her. I only knew that when the shelter volunteers herded us into the church basement 2 blocks over, she stayed close enough that I could feel the heat coming off her, and that my body, traitor that it was, leaned toward it like a plant leans toward a window. We didn't exchange names that first hour. We exchanged coffee from a dented thermos and a blanket she gave me without asking if I wanted it. And somewhere around midnight, with the whole city dark outside the one high window, she asked what my old company had done to me. I told her. All of it. I don't know why. She listened the way some people listen to a confession, like she was filing it away to use as evidence later, on my behalf. "They were wrong about you," she said. "You don't know that. I know exit routes when I see them planned by someone competent. I've hired worse instincts for a great deal more money." It should not have warmed me the way it did. It did anyway. By 2 in the morning, my suppressants had finally, fully failed, and the heat came on me like weather, fast, disorienting, humiliating in a room full of strangers. She got me into a side office before anyone noticed, locked the door, and stood with her back against it, like a wall built specifically to keep the rest of the world out. She never touched me without asking first. Not once. "Tell me to stop, and I will," she said, low, her hand hovering an inch from my jaw, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her palm, and nothing else. "Ask me with your words," I asked. "God help me," I asked, and she answered like a woman keeping a vow rather than taking a liberty, careful even when careful was the last thing my body wanted. Afterward, in the gray hour before the trains ran again, she traced the compass on the chain around my neck with one finger. "It doesn't point true anymore," I told her. "It hasn't since my father died." "Things break," she said. "Doesn't mean they stop working. Why would you want to fix a compass that doesn't point anywhere?" I didn't say I'd fix it. I said it still works. There's a difference. I asked her name. She told me to call her Isa, and something in the way she said it made me certain it wasn't the whole truth, though I was too tired and too undone to press. "If you ever need shelter," she said, "against my hair, my door doesn't lock against you." I believed her the way you believe a stranger at 4 a.m., completely and only until the sun comes up. When the trains started again, I was gone before she woke, ashamed of how much I'd wanted to stay, certain that whatever she was in daylight, and something about the way the shelter staff had deferred to her told me she was somebody, she would look at plain, unemployed, 26-year-old Ren Ashford in the light and see exactly what my old firm had seen. An asterisk. A liability, not worth the trouble of remembering. I was wrong about a great many things that night. That was only the first of them. 4 months later, 8 weeks pregnant and telling no one, I took the only contract my agency could find me, an emergency forensic audit for a company in crisis, client identity withheld until signing, fee large enough to cover a nursery I hadn't let myself plan yet. I signed without reading past the number. I have replayed that decision more times than I can count, and I have never once regretted it. Which tells you something about how this story ends, if you're the kind of person who needs to know that before you can bear the middle. The car the agency sent me had a driver who didn't speak, and a folder on the seat with a company crest I recognized before I recognized the address. Callaway Tower rose 60 floors out of the financial district like something carved rather than built, all black glass and old money. And the crest on the folder, a wolf's head in silver, belonged to a woman the business papers called the Wolf of Callaway Tower, a name spoken by rivals the way you'd speak of weather you couldn't control. I had read about her the way everyone had. I had never once connected her to a gray wool coat and a hand that asked permission before it touched me. Not until the elevator doors opened onto the 60th floor and a woman in a slate gray suit turned from the window, and I smelled vetiver, and rain struck stone, and the compass at my throat went as cold as the day my father drowned. The lobby of the executive floor was the kind of quiet that costs more than shouting. Glass the color of deep water. Floors so polished I could see the wrongness of my own reflection standing in it, a woman in a discount coat surrounded by furniture worth more than a year of my rent. A junior associate named Priya walked me through with the particular courtesy people reserve for someone they've already decided doesn't matter, pointing out the boardroom, the archive vault, the executive dining room I would not be using. "Ms. Callaway doesn't usually take meetings with outside auditors personally," she said, in a voice pitched, to make sure I understood the honor and the warning both. "You'll report to Greta Voss. Try not to need anything twice." Greta Voss turned out to be the one warm current in that whole glacial building, a broad-shouldered beta in her 50s who ran the executive floor like a border checkpoint and softened, fractionally, the moment she caught me skipping lunch on my second day. She didn't comment. She simply began leaving a second sandwich on my desk each afternoon, wrapped like it had wandered there by accident. And I understood before she ever said it that in 15 years of watching people move through that tower, she had learned exactly which ones needed feeding and which ones would rather starve than admit it. The audit itself was a labyrinth built to be walked in circles. Somebody, several somebodies, I suspected, though the paper trail kept leading to shell addresses that dissolved the moment I pulled them, had spent 18 months quietly bleeding value out of Callaway Holdings through supplier contracts, padded just enough to escape casual notice, and not enough to escape mine. Numbers have a rhythm, the way tides do, and these ones broke rhythm in the same 3 places every quarter, like a wave that kept crashing against a rock nobody else had charted. I didn't have a name yet. I had a shape. I have always trusted a shape before I trust a name. I avoided the top floor for 4 days. I told myself it was professionalism. It was cowardice, dressed carefully. On the 5th day, Greta appeared at my desk at 8 a.m. with an expression that made my stomach drop before she spoke. "Ms. Callaway wants to meet the auditor personally," she said. "Tomorrow, 9 sharp. She reviewed your preliminary report herself." Does she do that often? Review reports herself? Greta looked at me for a long moment, the way you look at a puzzle piece that's the wrong color for the picture on the box, but somehow still fits. "Never," she said. "Not once, in 15 years. I did not sleep that night. I lay awake with one hand on the small, still secret curve of my stomach and the compass cold against my collarbone, and I understood, the way you understand weather coming before you see the clouds, that tomorrow was going to break something open that I had spent 4 months trying to keep shut. She was standing at the window when I walked in, same as that first day, and she turned before I'd said a word, and I watched her face do the thing I imagine mine had done in the elevator. Recognition landing like a physical blow, control reasserting itself a half-second too late to hide the crack it left behind. Her pen hit the desk. She did not pick it up. "Cricket," she said. And it wasn't a question, and it wasn't the name I'd given her 4 months ago in a church basement, because I hadn't given her a name at all. She'd made one up for the way I kept noticing things in the dark, the way a cricket keeps singing after everyone else has gone quiet from fear. I hadn't known she'd kept it. I hadn't known she'd been keeping anything. "You're the wolf of Callaway Tower," I said, which was not what I meant to say, which was the only thing I could manage. "I'm Isolde Callaway," she said. Isa was true. It was just not the whole of it. Her eyes moved over me, slower now, and I watched her count the 4 months the way I would have counted a column, and something in her jaw tightened. "You left before the sun was up. I didn't think you'd want. I looked for you." Flat, absolute, not a confession so much as a fact laid on the table between us, the way she'd lay a contract. For 4 weeks I had a security team trying to trace a woman who gave a false name and vanished into a city of 9 million people. I don't chase what I don't intend to keep. I should have told her then. I have thought, in the months since, about every version of that morning where I opened my mouth and said the sentence instead of swallowing it. "I'm pregnant, and it's yours." And I've been terrified since the second I found out, and in every version I imagine, she doesn't flinch. But I didn't know that yet. I only knew that a man named Desmond Cade chose that exact moment to knock twice and let himself in without waiting for an answer, and the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees before he'd said a word. He was a large man, built for boardrooms, silver at the temples, a voice pitched to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. He looked at me the way Priya had, except colder, and did not bother lowering his voice. I wasn't informed we were bringing in outside help for internal matters, Isolde. The board will want to know why an Omega contractor has access to sealed financials 3 weeks before a confidence vote. The board will know what I decide to tell them, Desmond. Her voice hadn't risen. It didn't need to. Miss Ashford has full clearance. If that's a problem for you, take it up with the bylaws you helped write. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that told me everything about the kind of man he was before he said another word. Careful, he said, to me, not her. Some ledgers bite the hands that go digging in them. He left without waiting to be dismissed, which told me more about the real balance of power in that building than any org chart could have. Isolde watched the door close, and for a moment the ice in her expression thinned into something almost tired. He has 3 weeks to unseat me, she said, quiet now, like she was thinking aloud rather than briefing me. He needs a scandal or a fraud he can pin on my desk, and he spent 18 months building one or the other. I don't yet know which. She looked at me, and the tiredness folded back into resolve so fast I almost missed it. Find out, whatever it costs. I'll cover it. I didn't tell her I was already carrying something that would cost far more than money. I found the pattern 9 days later, at 11 p.m., alone in the archive vault with 3 monitors and a headache I told myself was exhaustion and not the second trimester announcing itself early. The shell companies routed through 4 cities and one recurring quirk. Every falsified invoice used a shipping registry number 1 digit off from a defunct merchant line my father had sailed for, 20 years dead now. A coincidence so specific, it stopped being a coincidence the moment I saw it twice. I was so deep in the numbers that I didn't notice the room tilting until it had already tilted, and the last thing I remember clearly is the compass swinging loose from my collar as I went down, and a voice saying my name, not Cricket, not Miss. Ashford, my actual name, for the first time, sharp with a fear I had never heard in it before. I woke on the leather sofa in Isolde's office with her coat over me and her hand pressed flat against my sternum, not checking my pulse, though I think that's what she told herself she was doing. Her expression had gone somewhere past controlled. Past cold. She was staring at me the way you stare at a column that finally, terribly adds up. You're pregnant, she said. Not a question. Isolde, how far along? Almost 5 months. Her hand didn't move from my sternum. I watched her do the arithmetic behind her eyes, the same arithmetic I'd been doing alone in my apartment for 4 months, and I watched it land. It's mine. Still not a question. I had never heard her voice do what it did on that word. Crack. Just slightly, like ice under a first careful step. Yes, the silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. I counted every one of them, because counting was the only thing keeping me from crying, and because some part of me was still braced for the version of this story where she stood up, straightened her jacket, and told Greta to have security see me out. She didn't stand up. She sat down instead on the edge of the sofa, close enough that her knee touched my hip, and she said, very quietly, like she was afraid of frightening something small, "Why didn't you tell me?" Because I ran the numbers on what a woman like you does with a mistake like me, and I didn't like the answer I got. You were never a mistake. Her hand finally moved. From my sternum to the curve I could no longer hide under my blazer, resting there with a lightness that undid me more than any declaration could have. I don't lose what's mine twice. She took me to the penthouse that night, not the tower, an apartment 3 floors above the executive suite that nobody at Callaway Holdings apparently knew existed. All warm wood where the offices below were all cold glass, like she'd built one honest room in a building full of performance. Mrs. Pemberton, her housekeeper, took one look at me and disappeared without a word, returning 20 minutes later with a pot of chamomile tea steeped strong and oversweetened with honey, exactly the way I'd complained once in a church basement 4 months ago that I liked it and never got it. I stared at the cup for a long moment before I could drink it. You remembered. I remember everything you told me that night, Isolde said, from the doorway, arms crossed. Watching me the way you watch something you're afraid will vanish if you look away. Your father's compass, the tea, the fact that you wanted someday a kitchen with a table big enough for more people than you had to invite. A pause. I have a kitchen with a table for 12 and no one has ever sat at more than 3 chairs. That's the saddest thing you've said to me. I'm aware. She sat across from me, not beside me, giving me the room I think she sensed I needed. My mother built this penthouse. She used to say a house should be big enough for the family you intend to have, not the one you currently do. She was murdered in a boardroom 2 floors below this one when I was 12, a rival investor, a vote that didn't go his way, a gun no one thought to check for at the door. My father's answer to grief was a doctrine. Love is a door left open, he told me, over and over, until I believed it. Don't leave doors open. I built a career keeping every door in this building locked, including the one to this apartment, and I have eaten alone at that 12-seat table for 11 years. I didn't say anything for a moment. I only reached across and put my hand over hers, and she let me, which from a woman who had spent 11 years locking doors was its own kind of confession. I was blamed for another man's fraud, I said, and no one at that firm asked me a single question before they decided I was the kind of person who'd do it. Omega. Emotional. Sloppy. I spent a year proving to strangers I wasn't sloppy, and I still don't know how to prove it to myself. I saw you counting exits in the dark while grown men wept, Isolde said. I have never once seen you sloppy. I have seen you careful to the point of cruelty toward yourself, which is not the same thing, and which I intend to argue you out of, at length, for as long as you'll let me. Tell me to stop and I will, I said back to her, quoting her own words, and something in her face broke open in a way I don't think it had since she was 12 years old. Ask me not to. Don't stop. What happened after that was slow and careful and gated at every step by a question and an answer, the way it had been the first time, except this time there was no dark to hide in and no morning train to run for. She kissed me like she was memorizing the shape of an apology. I let her. We had 11 days of something close to peace before Desmond Cade found out I was pregnant and decided a scandal was worth more to him than the truth. The headline broke at 6 a.m. on a Thursday, while I was still asleep in the penthouse with Isolde's arm heavy across my waist. Callaway CEO's secret pregnancy. Auditor hired to investigate fraud allegedly compromised. Board demands vote. Someone had leaked emails, doctored to imply I'd been planted by a rival firm to sabotage the confidence vote from the inside, my competence rewritten overnight into conspiracy. My name, my actual, hard-won name, was suddenly a punchline in 3 different business columns by 9 o'clock, and every one of them used the word Omega like it explained the whole plot. Isolde's lawyers arrived before breakfast. I sat in the penthouse kitchen, at the table for 12, and listened to 4 people in suits use the words optics and liability and distance, while Isolde stood at the window with her back to all of us, the same way she'd stood the first day I met her in that office, except This time, the wolf's head crest behind her looked less like power and more like a cage. "I need you to stay away from the tower," she said, finally, without turning around, "until the vote." "Isolde, it's not a request I'm making because I want it." Her voice had gone somewhere flat and far away, the boardroom voice, the one I hadn't heard her use with me since the storm. "Every hour you're photographed near me hands Cade another headline. I will not let him use you as the knife he cuts me open with. So instead you're cutting yourself open first." She didn't answer that. I packed a bag with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking, and Greta drove me back to my apartment without a word, her jaw tight the whole ride, and I sat on my own bed that night, with the news running silently on my phone, my photo, cropped and unflattering, beside the words conflict of interest, and I put both hands over the place where I'd felt the first flutter of movement 3 days before, and I let myself cry the way I hadn't let myself cry since Bristow and Hale let me go with a check and a faint apology. It was the worst night of the whole 4 months, worse than the blackout, worse than the vault floor rising up to meet me. I had been thrown away twice now by people who decided, without asking me a single question, exactly what kind of woman I was. I did not stay thrown away for long. Grief, in me, has always curdled fast into work, and by 2 a.m., I was back at my kitchen table with 3 years of Bristow and Hale training, and every scrap of the Callaway Shell Company data I'd saved to a personal drive against every rule of professional conduct I'd ever followed. Because some instinct in me, call it the auditor, call it the mother, call it the woman done being careful, had known, even then, that I might need it off the record. The pattern I'd half seen in the vault snapped fully into focus at 3:47 a.m. Every falsified invoice, every shell address, every padded supplier contract traced back through 4 cities to one signature authority, not forged, not laundered past recognition, just arrogant, hiding in plain sight the way men like Cade always hide, certain no one competent would ever look closely enough to see it. Desmond Cade hadn't just been building a case against Isolde. He'd been embezzling from Callaway Holdings for 18 months and using the fabricated fraud narrative to bury his own trail under hers, timing the confidence vote to remove her before anyone thought to check his signature instead. I called Greta at 4 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, already awake, already grieving something she hadn't said out loud yet. "I have him," I said. "I have all of it. I need to be in that boardroom before the vote." "She told you to stay away." She was wrong. It was the first time I had ever said those words about Isolde Callaway, and they tasted like the truest thing I'd said in weeks. "Tell her I'm coming." Isolde was waiting in the tower lobby at 6, still in yesterday's suit, and the look on her face when the elevator opened and she saw me standing there, with a flash drive in one fist and my compass steady against my collarbone for the first time in months, was not relief. It was something closer to shame. "I sent you away to protect you," she said. I told myself it was strategy. It was my father's doctrine, and I hate that I still reach for it under pressure. "I am sorry. You can apologize after," I said. "Right now, I need 11 minutes in front of your board." She looked at me the way Greta once said no one had looked at anyone in that building in 15 years, like she'd stopped, for the first time in a decade, being the coldest thing in the room. "Whatever happens in there," she said, "I am not letting go of you again. Not for a headline, not for a vote, not for anything my father ever taught me to fear." "Then don't," I said. "Just stand beside me and let me finish what I came here to do." The boardroom at 9 that morning held 11 directors, a room full of glass and old money, and a silence so total I could hear my own pulse in my ears, which is how I knew, before anyone spoke, that the baby had picked exactly this moment to remind me it existed too. I stood at the head of the table with the flash drive already loaded, Isolde seated close enough that our sleeves touched, and I laid it out the way I'd laid out every clean audit of my career, the shell registrations, the shipping numbers one digit off from a dead line my father used to sail. The signature authority buried under 4 layers of paperwork that led, every single time, back to the same man sitting 3 seats down with his silver hair and his reasonable voice gone very, very quiet. Desmond Cade's face went the color of the glass around us as I read the numbers aloud, dollar by dollar, 18 months of theft laid out in a rhythm. Even a room full of people who didn't read balance sheets for a living could follow, because I had built it on purpose. So a child could have followed it. The numbers don't lie, the men who arrange them do. I had waited a long time to say that sentence to a room that mattered. This is a fabrication, Cade started, too loud, too fast. An outside contractor with a personal relationship to the CEO, cherry-picking data too. The shipping registry numbers are a matter of federal record, Mr. Cade, I said, and every falsified invoice routes through an account you personally authorized in March, February, and again in June. I didn't cherry-pick anything. I found a pattern and I followed it. The same way I've followed every pattern I've ever been paid to find, and I would very much like the record to reflect that the only conflict of interest in this room is the one sitting 3 seats to my left. That was when it happened. 11:42 exactly, I would learn later, the same minute I'd relive 100 times since. A small, deliberate knock from the inside, like someone tapping to ask if it was safe to come out yet. My hand went to my belly under the table before I'd finished my sentence, breath catching audibly enough that 3 directors looked up. Beside me, Isolde went still, and then her hand found the same spot mine had, low and light and entirely without permission, in front of 11 board members and a man whose fraud she'd just watched me dismantle with numbers alone. She felt it. I watched it land on her face, unguarded, in front of everyone. The woman the business papers called the Wolf of Callaway Tower, undone at a boardroom table by a small fluttering knock that wasn't a headline or a strategy or a doctrine her father had ever taught her to fear. "That's my child," she said, to the room. To Cade. To no one in particular, her voice rough in a way I had never once heard it. "That is my mate, and that is my child, and I am done letting anyone in this room, including myself, pretend either fact is a liability." She stood, still with one hand resting where the kick had been, and looked at Cade with an expression that made even the air in the room go cold. "The board will vote on the evidence Miss Ashford has presented, and then you will be escorted out of this building by security, and you will never set foot in it again." The vote took 4 minutes. It was unanimous. Cade was arrested in the lobby 40 minutes later, on charges the district attorney's office would spend the next 8 months making stick, every shell company traced, every stolen dollar accounted for, every sneering word he'd said to me in that office paid back in the coin he understood best, a public, total, documented ruin. The room that had watched me walk in as a scandal watched me walk out, an hour later, as something else entirely. Priya, who'd once told me not to need anything twice, held the elevator for me with both hands and couldn't meet my eyes. Greta hugged me so hard I laughed out loud for the first time in 11 days. Isolde found me in the stairwell, of all places, 20 minutes after the board dispersed, and didn't say anything at all. She just pressed her forehead to mine, both hands framing my face, and breathed me in like a woman finally allowed to stop holding her breath. "Tell me to stop," she said, "and I will." "Don't stop," I said. "Not this time, not ever." She kissed me first. Then, low against my ear, she asked, the way she'd asked in a church basement 4 months and a lifetime ago, with words instead of instinct, because that was who she was underneath the wolf's head crest, whether I would let her claim me properly, bond and all, in front of people who mattered, instead of a locked door in an emergency shelter. I said yes before she'd finished the sentence. The mark she left that night, in the honest wood-paneled quiet of the penthouse 3 floors above all that glass, was gentle as a question and certain as an answer, and I felt the bond snap into place like a compass needle, finally, after 4 months of spinning, finding true north. Desmond Cade's sentencing came 6 weeks later. 11 years, full restitution. A name struck from every registry he'd once used to hide behind. He did not look at me once in the courtroom. I found I didn't need him to. Isolde proposed on a Tuesday, which she claimed afterward was deliberate, so the day the board meeting had tried to break us would belong to something better instead. She knelt in the kitchen with the table for 12, a small box in one hand and my father's compass, freshly reset in gold by a jeweler she'd tracked down herself, in the other. "It still doesn't point north," she said. "The jeweler says the needle's beyond repair." I told him that was fine. I said I only needed it to point toward you, and it's done that every day since the blackout. We were bonded properly 8 weeks after that, in the penthouse, with vows short enough to fit in the space between one held breath and the next. Greta stood as witness and cried without apologizing for it, and told anyone who'd listen, for months afterward, that in 15 years she had never once seen Isolde Calloway wait for anyone, and now she couldn't get her to stop. A year on, the table for 12 finally has more than 3 chairs filled. Our daughter arrived in March, loud about it in a way that made Isolde laugh until she cried, which I have learned is a rare and precious sound in that penthouse, and I intend to earn it as often as I can for the rest of my life. Cade's old office on the executive floor now belongs to Greta. The nursery has a window seat where the light comes in gold every morning, and on the sill, catching that same light, sits a small brass compass that finally, impossibly, points true. Not north, never north again, but steady all the same, toward the 2 of them, every single day. I used to believe that being seen clearly was the most dangerous thing that could happen to a woman like me. I have learned, since, that it is only dangerous when the person looking is searching for a reason to look away. The right person looks and keeps looking, and calls what she finds a beginning instead of a flaw. That is the whole of what I know now about love. It was never about being flawless enough to deserve it. It was only ever about being finally, fully seen. The end.